Hi everyone, whoop, thinny, whoop, Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Playboi Carti album, Whole Lotta Red. This is the long-awaited sophomore album from one of the most beloved rappers in the game right now, Playboi Carti. It's only been a few years now, really, since Carti made his full mainstream ascent, striking gold with a subtly experimental and psychedelic brand of trap music on his Die Lit record. Personally, I wasn't really crazy about his breakout mixtape in 2017, nor was I impressed by the round of promo he got out of the XXL 2017 freshman class on which he was listed, but I gotta admit, everything he was doing around that time did set the stage for how minimal, visceral, and envelope-pushing this project was. Now, of course, the magic of Die Lit doesn't simply boil down to Carti's earworm, repetitive refrains, his infectious, baby-voiced inflections, because the consistent production from Pierre Bourne was also a significant part of the equation. However, on Whole Lotta Red, he seems to have mostly foregone Pierre's production, which I don't see as entirely a bad thing. Not just because Pierre's sound is so easily replicable, but also Whole Lotta Red should be an opportunity for Carti to branch out, try something different, not just record Die Lit Part 2. And boy does Carti branch out on this project, which is not only apparent from the subtly satanic cover art, but Carti's embrace of vampires and vamp aesthetics in the song titles here and the social media run-up to this project. Looks like Carti's bringing goth to the trap on this one with a punk flair, and while he wouldn't be the first to do that, he certainly seems to be one of the most prominent. And in my opinion, it's these very elements that drive the most exciting and interesting moments on this LP. But with that being said though, part of me does feel like Whole Lotta Red does fall short, terribly short of its full potential, due to not pushing things as far as it could have, and also sounding somewhat half-baked at points. It's worth reminding viewers that Carti ended up dropping this project over this past Christmas, so maybe the release ended up being a little too premature, especially since he was rumored to have redone the album quite significantly after numerous song leaks over the past year or so. The track list on this thing is also pretty bloated at 24 songs, making Die Lit's 19 seem trim by comparison, even though the runtimes between both records aren't significantly different. It's also got to be pointed out that Carti varies up his vocal style on this record quite a bit too. Not just during the moments of this LP where he's straining his voice or screaming, but there are numerous parts where he seems to have mostly abandoned the incoherent, infantile vocal inflections that he's known for, to the point where his bars are more crystal clear than they've ever been. Carti's new approaches on this record are generally refreshing. It's just disappointing when it doesn't seem like he has all of the kinks worked out. For one, Whole Lotta Red is undoubtedly a record that is abrasive by design, but there are some vocal mixes here that do leave a lot to be desired. Not just because Carti's voice occasionally comes off very pitchy and painful to the ear, but some tracks just don't feel that visceral because there's a lack of balance between the vocals and the instrumental, leaving the beat feeling like it really has no presence. Which is especially true of Vamp Anthem, a track that I had high expectations for given the aesthetic change on this record, but it really just ended up being this very dry set of trap perks, which is aided horrendously by these terrible MIDI synthesizers that play out this laughably stereotypical vampire intro on the song. However, I will say occasionally this record's messy presentation does work in its favor. There is the insane stop breathing, which is so heavily compressed, nearly every sound in the mix is crackling like a campfire, the result being one of the most deadly and cathartic tracks on the record, especially considering the murderous lyrics and gruesome vocal inflections and garish ad-libs. Blah! On That Time is similarly intense in my opinion. There's also the completely out of control Jump Out of the House, which is packed with this absolutely crushing bass and one demented vocal inflection after another. It seems like Carti is pushing some of those baby-voiced vibes to a new and more experimental place to a degree. Then the track Punk Monk may feature one of the most distorted instrumentals on the entire LP, but this beat actually ends up being the foundation for a sobering moment of reflection for Carti, where he essentially starts listing out the various ways he has been mistreated, ignored, counted out, and betrayed in the music industry, naming names as well. There's one particular bar that stuck out for me where he says he's not friendly at all, he doesn't even want these other rappers on his songs. It's essentially an anti-social anthem, and the scant amount of features on this thing certainly reinforces that vibe. And speaking of the features on this record, I think all of them bang. Kanye West on Go to the Moon sounds completely off of his rocker, and that, my god, that Budapest line is like classic Kanye all the way. I also love the experimental string-backed beat that this track delivers too. My one major disappointment with it is that Carti doesn't really have much presence on his own song. He kind of pops in, drops a few bars at the very end. Kanye and the beat both overshadow him. It just barely feels like a Carti song to begin with. Then there's Kid Cudi on the track Metamorphosis, whose trademark hums layer harmoniously against an instrumental that sounds like it's sampled, I don't know, a part of the Castlevania soundtrack or something. Not literally, but the keys in this instrumental do make me feel like I'm playing some like 8-bit 2D scroller where I'm like shooting at or stabbing some ghosts and ghouls. Lyrically, this track is pretty focused for a Carti song too, with him going into the personal and aesthetic changes he's undergoing in this recent album cycle. That's Metamorphosis. Then there's also Teen X featuring Future, where it seems like aesthetically Carti is trying to extend the minimal, trippy trap sounds that he hit upon with Die Lit, update them in a way. He goes even more out there vocally, getting squeakier by the minute, while Future mostly matches his energy. And while there's nothing necessarily wrong with Carti going back to what works for him on a new record, there are points on this LP where I think he plays it a bit too predictable and also underwhelms with a supremely disengaged vocal performance. For one, I think he is really phoning it in on the song Place. The track even features a Pierre Bourne beat. If I had to put this one in a nutshell, I would say it's the soundtrack to Not Even Trying at All. A little later, the song Over sounds similarly lifeless too. Meanwhile, the song Sky is a pretty straightforward drug anthem, but this vibe essentially puts Carti in a place of emotional numbness. Weak beat choice too. This one does not present much of a vibe. There are some compelling portions of the final leg though, like the ambitious Feel Like Dyin', which features a prominent Bon Iver sample. Also Die For Guy, where Carti is reflecting on his past, his brother, paranoia. But for the most part, this record really loses steam toward the end. I could keep going into the minor details of this LP, more various flaws, but honestly, I think it's pretty apparent at this point that Whole Lotta Red is very much all over the place. There are tracks that reinforce more of a vampire or a goth vibe. There are tracks that reinforce more of a Die Lit 2.0 vibe, or maybe even a Die Lit 000.1 vibe. There are also a few cuts that seem oddly derivative of his contemporaries like Young Thug and Lil Uzi Vert. There is some extremely safe, bland production on this thing that bores me to death. Meanwhile, the more experimental mixes only slap some of the time. So yes, this thing is a flawed record, and I can see why it's created such a split in Carti's fanbase. But that being said though, the highlights here are so good, I can see the general attraction that some people are experiencing with this project. While I can't rate this record very high due to some apparent flaws, I wouldn't be surprised if this record created an almost 808s and Heartbreak type moment, where yeah, it's not a perfect LP, but the highlights are so bold and are so creative, they'll most likely be adopted by those who end up appreciating this record more for its ideas than its execution. And of course, there is always the chance for Playboi Carti himself to expound upon these themes on a future record, which hopefully ends up coming out sooner rather than later. Feeling a decent 2 strong 5.